It was the kind of Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday in Millbrook. Quiet, predictable, and heavy with the weight of bills that wouldn't pay themselves. Jim Hendricks wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, squinting at the afternoon sun filtering through the dusty windows of Henderson's auto repair. The bell above the door hadn't chimed in 3 hours, and his stomach reminded him that lunch had been a luxury he couldn't afford today. He glanced at the framed photo, taped to his toolbox. Lucy, his 8-year-old daughter, grinning toothlessly at the camera, her school uniform slightly rumpled, but her eyes bright with the kind of joy that made every sacrifice worth it. She'd be getting out of school soon, probably already thinking about the ice cream cone he'd promised her for finishing her math homework. An ice cream cone that would have to wait until Friday's paycheck, assuming Mrs. Henderson remembered to cut it this week. The town of Millbrook wasn't much to look at. Population 3,200 on a good day, one main street lined with businesses that had seen better decades, and the kind of stillness that either felt like peace or suffocation, depending on your perspective. For Jim, it had become both. He'd moved here after Sarah died, chasing the promise of lower rent and a fresh start, but 3 years later, fresh starts felt more like survival strategies. He was reaching for his water bottle when he heard it, the scrape of metal against pavement, followed by a frustrated sigh that carried more weight than simple annoyance. Through the open bay door, he saw her. A woman in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, crouched beside a vintage blue bicycle, her honey-colored hair falling in waves around her face as she examined what appeared to be a completely detached chain. She wore simple clothes, jeans that fit well but weren't flashy, a cream-colored sweater that looked soft and expensive, but not ostentatious, canvas sneakers that had seen some miles. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself even in frustration, that suggested grace. But it was her expression that caught Jim's attention, focused, determined, like someone accustomed to solving problems but genuinely puzzled by this particular mechanical mystery. Jim set down his water and walked toward the door. "Looks like you've got some trouble there," he called, his voice carrying the careful politeness of someone who'd learned not to assume anything about strangers. She looked up, and Jim felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were green, the kind of green that reminded him of deep forest pools. And when she smiled, tentative but genuinite, transformed her entire face. "I'm not entirely sure what happened," she said, gesturing helplessly at the bicycle. "1 minute, I was riding along, perfectly fine, and the next minute is this." Jim approached slowly, noting how she tensed slightly before relaxing again, as if she'd trained herself to be cautious but was working to override that instinct. "Mind if I take a look?" She nodded, stepping back to give him space. "Please, I'm Alex, by the way." "Jim." He knelt beside the bike, immediately spotting the problem. "Your chain's come off the gears completely. Looks like it got tangled up with something, maybe a stick or some debris. But the good news is, it's fixable." Relief washed over her features. "Oh, thank goodness. I was starting to think I'd have to walk it all the way back to, well, all the way back." Jim noticed the hesitation but didn't press. Instead, he focused on the chain, carefully working it free from where it had wound itself around the rear derailleur. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the kind of muscle memory that came from years of fixing things that other people had given up on. "You do this often?" Alex asked, watching him work with genuine curiosity. "Fix bikes? Not so much anymore, but mechanical problems are pretty much the same, whether it's a car, a motorcycle, or a bicycle. It's all about understanding how the parts want to work together." He glanced up at her, noting how she listened with real attention, not the polite half-interest most people showed when he talked about his work. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," she said softly, "like everything has its place, its purpose." Jim paused in his work, struck by something in her tone. "Yeah, exactly. though sometimes you have to help things remember where they belong. He worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, carefully threading the chain back through the gears and adjusting the tension. Alex didn't hover or offer unhelpful suggestions the way some people did. She simply watched, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about what he was doing or why certain adjustments were necessary. "There," Jim said finally, standing and wiping his hands on his rag again. "Give it a try." Alex climbed onto the bicycle, and Jim noticed how naturally she settled into the seat, how smoothly she began to pedal. This wasn't someone who was new to cycling. She had the easy confidence of someone who'd been riding for years. The bike responded perfectly, chain engaging smoothly as she rode in a small circle in front of the shop. "It's perfect," she said, dismounting with a smile that made Jim's stomach do something unexpected. "Thank you so much. What do I owe you?" Jim started to wave her off. It had been maybe 15 minutes of work, hardly worth charging for, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine gratitude in her voice, or maybe it was the fact that Lucy's ice cream fund could use even a small boost. "How about $5? He said, naming a price so low it was almost embarrassing. Alex reached into her bag, and Jim caught a glimpse of what looked like an expensive wallet before she quickly pulled out a $20 bill. "Keep the change," she said, pressing it into his hand before he could protest. "Really? You saved my entire afternoon." "That's too much," Jim said, but she was already swinging her leg over the bicycle again. "It's exactly right," she said firmly. Then softer, "Thank you, Jim, really." She rode away with a grace that made it look effortless, and Jim found himself watching until she disappeared around the corner onto Main Street. Only then did he look down at the 20 in his hand, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. That evening, over dinner at their small kitchen table, mac and cheese from a box, elevated with some frozen peas, and the last of the good cheese he'd been saving, Lucy chatted about her day while Jim found his thoughts drifting to green eyes and the way Alex had listened when he talked about mechanical harmony. "Dad, you're not listening," Lucy said, and Jim realized she was right. "Sorry, kiddo. What were you saying about Mrs. Patterson's cat?" Lucy gave him the look she'd perfected, part exasperation, part affection, wholly 8 years old. "I was saying that Whiskers got stuck in the tree again, and Mr. Chen had to call the fire department, but this time they said they weren't coming because Whiskers always gets down by himself eventually." "And did he?" "Of course he did. But not until after Mrs. Patterson cried for like an hour." Lucy took a careful bite of mac and cheese, then looked at her father with the serious expression she wore when she was thinking hard about something. "Dad, why do people cry about things that always work out okay?" Jim considered the question, struck by its depth. "I think sometimes people cry because they're scared, even when they know things might be okay. Fear doesn't always listen to logic." Lucy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Like when I'm scared of the dark, even though I know there's nothing actually scary in my room." Exactly like that. They finished dinner in companionable silence, and Jim found himself thinking about fear and logic and the way Alex had hesitated before saying where she was riding back to. Later, after Lucy was in bed and he was washing dishes by hand, the dishwasher had given up the ghost 2 months ago. And repair wasn't in the budget. Jim wondered if he'd see her again. He didn't have to wonder long. The next afternoon, just as he was starting to think about closing up early, the bell above the door chimed, and Alex walked in. She was wearing different clothes, a sundress this time, simple but elegant, with sandals that looked comfortable rather than fashionable, but the same tentative smile. "Hi," she said, and Jim was surprised by how glad he was to see her. "Hey, bike giving you trouble again?" "No, actually, it's running perfectly. She paused, looking around the shop, as if she was seeing it for the first time. "I was wondering if you'd like to get coffee sometime, or tea, or just talk." Jim blinked, certain he'd misheard. You want to get coffee with me? Is that strange? Alex asked, and Jim caught something vulnerable in her voice. I just feel like I don't meet many people who, I don't know, who see the world the way you do. The way I do? Like everything deserves to be fixed rather than thrown away. Like there's value in understanding how things work. She was fidgeting with the strap of her bag, and Jim realized she was nervous. But if you're not interested, I completely understand. I'm interested, Jim said quickly, surprising himself with his certainty. I'm very interested. But I should probably mention that I have a daughter, 8 years old. She's pretty much the center of my universe. Alex's smile became something radiant. I'd love to meet her. And that was how, 3 days later, Jim found himself sitting across from Alex at Millbrook's single coffee shop, a place called the Daily Grind, that took itself a little too seriously but made excellent blueberry muffins, while Lucy peppered her with questions about everything from her favorite color to her opinion on the relative merits of cats versus dogs. Purple, Alex answered seriously. And I like both cats and dogs. But I've never had a pet because I travel too much. Where do you travel to? Lucy asked, with the direct curiosity that made adults either charmed or uncomfortable. Alex seemed charmed. Lots of places. Sometimes for work. Sometimes just to see new things. But lately, I've been thinking it might be nice to stay in one place for a while. Like here? Lucy asked hopefully. Maybe, Alex said, and Jim caught her glancing at him as she said it. They talked for over an hour about books and movies and the way the light fell differently in small towns than in big cities. Alex listened to Lucy's elaborate explanation of her science project with the kind of attention that suggested genuine interest, and she laughed at Jim's stories about the strange things people brought to the repair shop with a delight that felt completely unguarded. There was this one time, Jim was saying, this guy brought in his lawnmower and swore it was making a noise like a dying whale. Turned out he'd accidentally mowed over his kid's toy phone, and the electronic sound was stuck on repeat inside the engine housing. Alex laughed so hard she snorted, which made Lucy giggle, which made Jim feel something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. When was the last time he'd sat somewhere with two people who made him feel like the best version of himself? Dad's really good at fixing things, Lucy said proudly. He fixed my music box when the ballerina broke, and now she spins even better than before. That's a very special skill, Alex said seriously. Not everyone knows how to make broken things beautiful again. Something in her tone made Jim look at her more closely, but before he could ask what she meant, Lucy was launching into a detailed description of the music box's inner workings, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. As they walked back toward Jim's truck later, Lucy skipping ahead, occasionally stopping to examine interesting rocks or flowers, Alex fell into step beside him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For letting me into this. She gestured toward Lucy, who was now attempting to convince a butterfly to land on her finger. For letting me see what a normal afternoon looks like. Jim frowned. Normal? Alex was quiet for a moment, and Jim sensed she was choosing her words carefully. I don't get a lot of normal in my life. This, sitting in a coffee shop, talking about lawnmowers and music boxes and science projects. It's wonderful. What's your life usually like? Jim asked, and immediately worried he was prying. But Alex didn't seem to mind the question. Complicated, she said simply. Lots of expectations. Lots of people who want things from me that I'm not sure I want to give. Jim waited, sensing there was more, but Alex had gone quiet again. Lucy ran back to them, breathless and grinning. Dad, can Alex come to dinner tomorrow? I want to show her my rock collection. Jim looked at Alex, who was smiling at Lucy with an expression that was part amusement, part something deeper. Would you like to? It won't be fancy, probably spaghetti and whatever vegetables I can convince Lucy to eat. I would love to, Alex said, and Jim believed her. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Jim found himself straightening up the small apartment above the repair shop with more care than he'd bothered with in months. Not that there was much to straighten: 3 rooms, basic furniture, everything clean but showing its age. He paused in front of the bathroom mirror, wondering when he'd started to look so tired, wondering what someone like Alex saw when she looked at him. Someone like Alex. But what was someone like Alex? Beautiful. Obviously, but there was more to it than that. She had the kind of natural elegance that suggested money, but she rode a bicycle instead of driving a car and seemed genuinely delighted by Lucy's unfiltered 8-year-old observations. She talked about travel and work in vague terms that made Jim curious. But she listened to his stories about fixing lawnmowers like they were the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. The next evening, Alex arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package. She'd traded the sundress for jeans and a soft blue shirt, and somehow she looked even more beautiful than before, less polished, more real. "For dinner," she said, handing Jim the wine. "And for Lucy," she added, giving the package to his daughter, who tore into it with enthusiasm. Inside was a small kaleidoscope, its brass housing warm and smooth in Lucy's hands. When she held it up to the light, her gasp of wonder made Alex beam. "It's like looking into a magic world." Lucy breathed, turning the kaleidoscope slowly and watching the patterns shift and change. "I thought you might like it," Alex said. "I saw it in a shop and it reminded me of you, full of beautiful surprises." Jim felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had bought Lucy a gift just because? Not for a birthday or Christmas, but simply because they thought she might enjoy it. Dinner was exactly as promised: said spaghetti with marinara sauce, green beans that Lucy grudgingly ate after negotiating down from the full serving, garlic bread made from the good bakery downtown. Alex ate everything with apparent enjoyment, complimenting Lucy on her table-setting skills and asking Jim about the difference between different types of motor oil, as if it were genuinely fascinating. "Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking about car stuff," Jim said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Most people don't understand that everything has a story," Alex replied. "A car comes to you because something's wrong, but fixing it isn't just about the mechanical problem, is it? It's about understanding what that car means to the person who drives it." Jim paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Yeah. Exactly that. Mrs. Chen's Buick isn't just a carrot's how she gets to visit her grandchildren. And Tommy Morrison's motorcycle isn't transportation, it's freedom. "See?" Alex smiled. "Stories." After dinner, while Jim washed dishes and Alex dried, she'd insisted on helping despite his protests, Lucy entertained them with an elaborate show and tell featuring her rock collection, her drawings from school, and a detailed explanation of how kaleidoscopes worked that was surprisingly accurate for an 8-year-old. "She's incredible," Alex said quietly, watching Lucy demonstrate the proper technique for examining rocks with a magnifying glass. "She is," Jim agreed. "I just wish I could give her more." Alex looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "More what?" "I don't know. More opportunities. Better clothes. A house instead of an apartment. College fund, that's more than just good intentions." Jim scrubbed at a particularly stubborn spot on the spaghetti pot. "She deserves the world, and some days I feel like I can barely give her this." "Jim," Alex's voice was soft but firm. "Look at her." Jim looked. Lucy was lying on her stomach in the living room, kaleidoscope in one hand, adding details to a drawing with intense concentration. Her tongue stuck out slightly the way it always did when she was focused, and she was humming something tuneless but content. "She's happy," Alex said simply. "She's confident and curious and kind. She knows she's loved. That's not barely giving her this. That's giving her everything that matters." Jim felt something ease in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "You really think so?" "I know so." Alex set down the dish towel and turned to face him fully. I've known a lot of people who had every material advantage you could imagine, and they weren't half as grounded as Lucy is. Love and attention and stability, those are the things that build a person. Everything else is just decoration. There was something in her voice, a weight that suggested personal experience, but before Jim could respond, Lucy appeared at his elbow. "Dad, can Alex see my room? I want to show her the music box you fixed." Jim looked at Alex, who nodded eagerly. "I would love to see it." Lucy's room was small but cheerful, painted yellow because she'd been unable to choose between pink and blue when they'd moved in. The music box sat on her dresser, a delicate thing with a ballerina that spun to Fur Elise when wound. But what caught Alex's attention wasn't the music box, it was the bookshelf, packed with library books and a few treasured volumes with worn covers. "You like to read," Alex observed, running her finger along the spines. "Dad reads to me every night," Lucy said proudly. "Right now we're doing The Secret Garden, but before that was Charlotte's Web, and before that was all the Ramona books. What's your favorite so far?" Lucy considered this seriously. "The Secret Garden, I think. I like how Mary makes the garden come alive again, even though everyone said it was dead forever." Alex glanced at Jim over Lucy's head, and he saw something flicker in her expression, recognition maybe, or understanding. "That's a very good choice," she said softly. Later, after Lucy had been tucked into bed and Jim and Alex were sitting on the small balcony outside the apartment, sharing the bottle of wine she'd brought, Alex was unusually quiet. "Penny for your thoughts," Jim said, refilling her glass. Alex was quiet for so long that Jim wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone in a very long time?" "Of course." Alex stared out at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "My full name is Alexandra Whitmore." Jim waited, sensing there was more. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "As in Whitmore Industries," Alex continued. "As in the Whitmore Foundation, Whitmore Holdings, Whitmore everything. My family owns, well, more than most people see in a lifetime." Jim felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're rich. Very rich. Generationally, obscenely rich. The kind of rich where money stops being something you think about because you've never not had it." Alex finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And I hate it." Jim didn't know what to say. Rich people were an abstract concept in his world, something you saw on TV or read about in magazines, not something you had dinner with or watched examine your daughter's rock collection. "I don't understand," he said finally. Alex laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My father owns 17 companies across 4 countries. My mother sits on the boards of 8 different charities and has never once asked what any of them actually do. My brother is being groomed to take over the empire, and everyone just assumes I'll marry someone appropriate and produce the next generation of Whitmores to carry on the tradition. And you don't want that. I want to be able to go to a coffee shop without wondering if people are being nice to me because they like me or because they know who I am. I want to have conversations about lawnmowers and music boxes and rock collections. I want to matter because of what I do, not because of what I inherited." Jim absorbed this slowly. "Is that why you're here? In Millbrook?" Alex nodded. "I've been moving around for the past year, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not Alexandra Whitmore, heiress. Just Alex, riding a bicycle and fixing broken chains with kind strangers." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of her revelation settling between them. Jim found himself processing not just what she'd told him, but what it meant for her, for him, for Lucy. "Are you going to leave?" he asked finally. "I don't know." Alex's voice was small. "I don't know anything anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm somewhere that feels real, with people who see me as just me. But I also know that eventually, reality is going to catch up." My family, my responsibilities, the life I'm supposed to be living. Jim reached over and took her hand, surprised by his own boldness. What if you didn't have to choose? What do you mean? I mean, what if there was a way to be both? Alexandra Whitmore and Alex, who fixes bicycle chains and loves kaleidoscopes and reads stories about secret gardens. Alex looked at him with something that might have been hope. You think that's possible? I think, Jim said slowly, that the best parts of who you are don't change based on how much money you have. And I think anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve your time. Alex squeezed his hand. Even if it means complications, media attention, family pressure, a whole world of obligations you never signed up for. Jim thought about Lucy, asleep in her small yellow room, and about the way Alex had listened to her rock collection presentation with genuine fascination. He thought about green eyes and gentle hands and the way someone could see the world as full of things worth fixing. Especially then, he said. That night, after Alex had gone back to wherever she was staying, she still hadn't told him. And he hadn't asked. Jim stood in Lucy's doorway, watching her sleep. The kaleidoscope sat on her nightstand, catching moonlight from the window and throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. He thought about secret gardens and broken things made beautiful again. He thought about love as a choice rather than a circumstance, and about the difference between what people deserved and what they were brave enough to reach for. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new questions, new possibilities. But tonight, in the quiet of his small apartment above a repair shop in a town most people had never heard of, Jim Hendricks allowed himself to believe that sometimes the most unlikely things could grow into something extraordinary. 2 weeks later, the first photographers showed up. Jim first noticed them on a Tuesday morning, lurking across the street from Henderson's Auto Repair, with long lens cameras and the kind of studied casualness that immediately screamed surveillance. He might not have thought much of it. Millbrook occasionally attracted amateur photographers drawn to its small-town charm, except that their attention seemed focused specifically on his shop. Alex had been coming by regularly since their dinner, sometimes with specific destinations in mind. She'd shown him and Lucy her favorite hiking trail, a hidden swimming hole, the old cemetery where she liked to readan sometimes just to sit and talk while he worked. She'd become a fixture of sorts, perched on a stool in the shop bay, asking questions about carburetors and transmissions, while Lucy did homework at the small desk Jim had set up in the corner. "Dad," Lucy said that Tuesday afternoon, peering out the window with the kind of intense curiosity that usually meant trouble, "why are those men taking pictures of our building?" Jim looked up from the engine he was rebuilding, following Lucy's gaze to where 3 men with cameras were now openly photographing the shop front. His stomach dropped. "I don't know, kiddo. Maybe they're documenting local businesses for some kind of town project." But even as he said it, Jim knew it wasn't true, and when Alex arrived 20 minutes later, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly as she dismounted from her bicycle, he knew his fears were confirmed. "They found me," she said without preamble, not bothering with their usual greeting. Lucy looked up from her math homework, immediately sensing the tension in the room. "Who found you?" Alex glanced at Jim, clearly uncertain how much to say in front of his daughter. Jim made the decision for her. "Lucy, why don't you go upstairs and start getting ready for dinner? I'll be up in a few minutes. But I want to know." "Lucy." Jim's tone was gentle but firm. "Please." Lucy huffed with 8-year-old indignation, but gathered her books and trudged toward the stairs. "This better not be one of those boring grown-up things," she called over her shoulder. When they heard the apartment door close, Alex sank onto her usual stool, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Reporters," she said. "Photographers. Someone must have recognized me, or maybe they traced my credit cards, or—" She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "It doesn't matter how, they're here." Jim wiped his hands on his shop rag, buying time while he processed this. He'd known this moment would come eventually. Alex had been too good to be true, too perfect to last. People like her didn't end up with people like him, not in real life. What happens now, he asked. Now they start digging. They'll want to know who you are, who Lucy is, why the Whitmore heiress is spending time in a small-town auto shop. Alex's voice was bitter. They'll probably have photographers outside Lucy's school by tomorrow, reporters calling the shop, people offering money for exclusive interviews about your relationship with Alexandra Whitmore. Jim felt something cold and protective rise in his chest. They can't just invade our privacy like that. Alex laughed, but it was a sound full of broken glass. They can and they will. This is what I was trying to escape, Jim. This is why I can't have normal things. So what are you saying? Alex looked at him with eyes that held too much sadness for someone her age. I'm saying I have to go, tonight probably, before this gets worse. And that's it, you just disappear? It's better this way. For you, for Lucy. You don't want this kind of attention. Trust me, it destroys everything it touches. Jim stared at her, feeling anger build alongside the heartbreak. Don't I get a say in this? Don't we get to decide what we can handle? Jim. No. Listen to me. He stepped closer, his voice low but intense. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about what's best for me and Lucy. We're not fragile flowers that'll wilt under a little scrutiny. A little scrutiny? Alex stood up, her own anger finally showing. You have no idea what this is like. They'll tear apart your entire life looking for dirt. They'll interview your ex-girlfriends, your neighbors, Lucy's teachers. They'll dig into your finances, your past. Sarah's death, nothing will be off limits. The mention of Sarah hit Jim like a physical blow, but he didn't back down. So we'll deal with it. Together. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. Jim's voice was louder than he'd intended, and he forced himself to lower it. Help me understand instead of just deciding I can't handle the truth. Alex stared at him for a long moment, and Jim could see the war playing out behind her green eyes, hope, battling with learned helplessness, love fighting against a lifetime of conditional relationships. My ex-fiancé sold photos of me to tabloids, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Intimate photos, photos taken in private moments when I thought I was safe. He made $2 million and bought a house in the Hamptons. Jim felt sick. Alex, my college roommate wrote a tell-all book about what it was like living with a Whitmore. She fabricated half the stories, but it didn't matter, it was a bestseller. She's still doing interviews about it 5 years later. Alex wrapped her arms around herself. My brother's best friend tried to blackmail me with made-up stories about drug use and eating disorders. When I refused to pay him, he sold the stories anyway. Those people weren't your friends. How do you know? Alex's voice cracked. How do you know that in 6 months or a year, when the novelty wears off and the money gets tight, you won't start seeing dollar signs when you look at me? How do you know that Lucy won't grow up thinking the attention is normal, that being photographed and followed and analyzed is just part of life? Jim was quiet for a long moment, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just about reporters or media attention, this was about trust. About a lifetime of being valued for what she could provide rather than who she was. I don't know, he said finally. I can't promise that none of this will be hard, or that I'll never make mistakes, or that Lucy won't struggle with some of it. But I can promise that if you stay, we'll figure it out together. And I can promise that my feelings for you have nothing to do with your money. How can you be sure? Jim gestured around the small, cluttered shop. Look around, Alex. Do I look like someone who's motivated by money? If I wanted wealth, I wouldn't be in Millbrook fixing other people's cars and living in a 3-room apartment. But the reporters, the attention, will be awful, Jim agreed, but temporarily awful. Eventually, they'll get bored and move on to someone else. And in the meantime, Lucy and I will still be here. Alex was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away as quickly as they fell. I'm scared. I know. Jim reached for her hands, finding them cold and trembling. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of you leaving. From upstairs came the sound of Lucy's voice calling down, "Dad? Are you coming up? I'm hungry, and there's more weird guys with cameras outside now." Jim and Alex looked at each other, and despite everything, Alex almost smiled. "Duty calls." "Come upstairs," Jim said. "Let's have dinner and figure this out together, all three of us. What if Lucy doesn't understand? What if she's scared by all this?" "Lucy," Jim said with certainty born of 8 years of parenting, "is tougher than you think, and she cares about you. That matters more than anything else." They climbed the stairs together, and Jim could hear Lucy setting the table with more enthusiasm than usual, the good plates that they saved for special occasions, glasses instead of plastic cups. When they reached the top, she was standing in the kitchen doorway with a wooden spoon in one hand and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Are you staying for dinner, Alex?" she asked. "Because I already made 3 place settings, and I put out the fancy napkins." Alex laughed, and it was the first genuine sound she'd made since arriving at the shop. "I would love to stay for dinner." Over Lucy's favorite meal, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Elevated with good bread and fresh basil, they explained the situation in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Alex was famous, which meant people wanted to take her picture and write stories about her. Some of those people might want to take pictures of them too, which could be uncomfortable but wasn't dangerous. Lucy listened with the serious attention she reserved for important information, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed how much she understood about the world beyond Millbrook. "So you're like a princess?" she asked Alex. "Not exactly, but sort of, I guess." "Cool." Lucy took a thoughtful bite of grilled cheese. "Are you going to have to go away now that people found you?" Alex glanced at Jim, then back at Lucy. "I don't know yet. That depends on a lot of things." "Like what?" "Like whether your dad and you are okay with things being complicated for a while. Like whether I'm brave enough to stop running from problems and start solving them instead." Lucy nodded sagely. "Dad always says that running away from problems just means they chase you, but if you turn around and face them, they're usually smaller than you thought. Your dad is a very smart man." "I know," Lucy said with 8-year-old matter-of-factness. Then, with devastating directness, "Do you love him?" Alex choked on her soup, and Jim felt his face burn. "Lucy." "Because he loves you," Lucy continued blithely. "He gets the same look when he talks about you that he used to get when he talked about Mom. The happy, sad look." Jim stared at his daughter, wondering when she'd become so perceptive and whether he'd been as transparent as she suggested. Alex recovered first. "The happy, sad look?" "You know," Lucy said, waving her spoon illustratively. "Happy because the person makes you feel good, but sad because loving people is scary, and sometimes they go away." Out of the mouths of babes, Jim thought. He looked at Alex, who was staring at Lucy with something like wonder. "Yes," Alex said quietly. "I do love him. And I love you too, Lucy. Which is why this is so hard." Lucy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Because you don't want the picture people to bother us." "Exactly. But Dad's right, problems get smaller when you face them. And besides," Lucy added with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world, "we're pretty good at handling weird stuff. Remember when the roof leaked and we had to live with buckets everywhere for a month? Or when Dad got food poisoning and I had to take care of him? We're tough." Alex laughed. And this time, it was pure delight. "You are definitely tough." That night, after Lucy had gone to bed clutching her kaleidoscope and extracting promises that Alex would still be there in the morning, Jim and Alex sat on the small balcony, watching the photographer's telephoto lenses glint in the streetlights below. "I called my family's publicist," Alex said. "Damage control is already in motion. Official statements about my right to privacy, threats of legal action against anyone who harasses you or Lucy, that sort of thing. Will it help?" "Some. The legitimate news outlets will back off, at least from Lucy, but the tabloids," she shrugged, "we'll see." Jim was quiet for a moment, processing the casual way she'd mentioned family publicists and legal action. This really is your world, isn't it? The money, the lawyers, the media management. It's the world I was born into, Alex corrected. But it doesn't have to be the only world I live in. What do you mean? Alex turned to face him fully. I mean, what if I stayed? Not just here in Millbrook, but in this life. What if I found a way to be Alexandra Whitmore when I need to be, but Alex when I want to be? Is that possible? I don't know. But I've been thinking about what you said about not having to choose between being both people. Maybe there's a way to use the resources I inherited for something good while still having a real life. Jim felt hope unfurling in his chest, tentative but growing stronger. What would that look like? Well, Alex said, and he could hear the smile in her voice, even in the darkness. It might look like investing in small towns that need revitalization. Supporting local businesses, funding education programs, creating opportunities for people who don't usually get them. Like a foundation, but one that I actually run instead of just attending board meetings for. One where I know every program, every grant recipient, every success story. Alex reached for his hand. It might also look like a certain auto repair shop getting the equipment upgrades it needs, and a certain 8-year-old getting the college fund she deserves. Jim pulled his hand back, sudden alarm bells ringing. Alex, I don't want your money. I know you don't. That's why I want to give it to you. She caught his hand again before he could withdraw it completely. Not as charity, and not as payment for putting up with my complicated life. As investment in something I believe in. Which is you. The way you see the world, the way you raise Lucy, the way you make broken things beautiful again. What if we could do that on a bigger scale? Jim was quiet, wrestling with pride and practicality. I don't know how to be with someone who has that kind of money. And I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't want it, Alex admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. The next morning brought chaos. Jim woke to the sound of car doors slamming and voices calling questions from the street below. When he peered out the window, he counted at least a dozen reporters and photographers camped outside the shop, some with professional equipment, others clearly local stringers hoping to catch a break. Dad. Lucy appeared in his doorway, still in her pajamas but wide awake. There are a lot of people outside. I know, kiddo. Remember what we talked about last night? Lucy nodded seriously. The picture people. Are we going to be okay? Before Jim could answer, Alex emerged from the guest room she'd slept on the couch, insisting it was more appropriate looking, like she'd barely slept, but somehow still beautiful. We're going to be fine, she said firmly, but it might be a little crazy for a few days. As if to underscore her point, Jim's phone rang. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Alex said quickly. They'll call constantly once they have your number. Let everything go to voicemail for now. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Then Alex's phone started ringing. Then the shop's landline. This is nuts, Jim muttered, watching reporters position themselves for the best angles on the building. Welcome to my world, Alex said grimly. But it won't last forever. The key is not to give them anything interesting to report. No dramatic exits, no angry confrontations, no hiding. Just normal life, as much as possible. Lucy pressed her face to the window, watching the circus below with fascination rather than fear. They look bored, she observed. They are bored, Alex confirmed. And bored reporters eventually go away. But getting Lucy to school proved to be the first challenge. The moment they appeared on the street, cameras started clicking and voices started calling questions. Alex handled it with a composure that Jim found both impressive and heartbreaking. She walked calmly, ignored the questions completely, and placed herself between the cameras and Lucy with practiced ease. Miss Whitmore, is it true you're dating a local mechanic? Alex, how long have you been in Millbrook? What do your parents think about your new boyfriend? Lucy, bless her heart, seemed to treat the whole thing like an adventure. She walked between Jim and Alex, occasionally waving at the cameras with the kind of unself-conscious friendliness that made several photographers lower their lenses and smile despite themselves. At the school, Principal Martinez was waiting with a grim expression and 2 security guards. "Mr. Hendricks, we need to talk." The conversation was brief and predictable. The school couldn't prevent reporters from taking photos on public property, but they could and would prohibit anyone without authorization from entering school grounds. They'd also increase supervision during pick-up and drop-off times. "Will Lucy be safe?" Jim asked. "As safe as we can make her," Martinez assured him. "But you should know, we've already had 3 calls this morning from reporters asking about her academic records, her friends, her activities." Jim felt his jaw clench. "They can't access any of that, right?" "Not legally, no, but that doesn't mean they won't try other methods." When they returned to the shop, the crowd of reporters had grown. Someone had brought coffee and donuts, suggesting they planned to stay for a while. Jim tried to work a transmission rebuild that had been waiting for parts, but found it impossible to concentrate with cameras constantly trained on the open bay door. "You could close the door," Alex suggested from her perch on the stool. "And look like I'm hiding." "No thanks." "Then let's give them something boring to photograph." For the next hour, Alex helped Jim with the transmission work, handing him tools and asking technical questions while completely ignoring the reporters 20 feet away. Her presence was calming, and Jim found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of mechanical work. "How long does a transmission rebuild usually take?" Alex asked, watching him carefully remove a gear assembly. "Depends on what's wrong and what parts are available. This one's probably a 2-day job." "And how did you learn to do this?" "Trial and error, mostly. Some formal training when I was younger, but mostly just taking things apart until I understood how they worked." One of the photographers called out, "Miss Whitmore, are you learning auto repair?" Alex didn't even glance in his direction. "Can you teach me?" she asked Jim. "To rebuild a transmission? That's pretty advanced. To understand how cars work, I've never actually known what happens when I turn a key." Jim smiled. "That I can definitely teach you." By noon, the novelty had clearly worn off for most of the reporters. Watching someone rebuild a transmission, it turned out, was exactly as boring as it sounded. Several had left, and the remaining ones were clearly checking their phones more than watching the shop. "They'll be back tomorrow," Alex warned as they watched the crowd thin, "and probably for a few days after that. But if we just keep being normal, eventually there won't be a story." "And then what?" Alex was quiet for a moment, watching Jim clean his hands with the same care he used for everything else thorough. Patient. Methodical. "Then we figure out what normal looks like for us." That evening, they ordered pizza rather than risk another trip to the grocery store. Lucy was full of stories about her day how her teacher had explained to the class that sometimes reporters were interested in regular people, how her friends thought it was totally cool, that she was almost famous, how she'd traded her fruit snacks for Emma's cookies because being in the news was apparently worth significant social currency in the 3rd grade. "Are you okay with all this?" Jim asked her, as she described the extra security guard who'd walked her to recess. Lucy considered the question seriously. "It's weird," she said finally, "but not scary weird, just different weird. Like when we went to that big mall in Burlington and everything was too loud and too bright, but also kind of exciting." "That's a very good comparison," Alex said. "Will it always be like this if you stay?" Lucy asked. "No," Alex said firmly. "This is just because it's new and surprising. Once people get used to the idea, they'll stop paying attention." "Good," Lucy said matter-of-factly. "Because I like having you here, but I don't like having my picture taken when I'm eating breakfast." Later, after Lucy was in bed and the last of the photographers had packed up for the night, Jim and Alex sat on the balcony again. The evening was warm, with the kind of gentle breeze that made Vermont summers perfect. "I made some calls today," Alex said, to lawyers, to my family, to some people who might be able to help with the media situation. And it's complicated, but manageable. The legal team thinks they can get most of the outlets to agree to leave Lucy out of any coverage. As for the rest, she shrugged. I'm an adult making my own choices. There's not much they can do to stop that. What did your family say? Alex was quiet for so long that Jim wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. My father wants me to come home immediately. He thinks this is some kind of rebellious phase that's gotten out of hand. My mother is mostly concerned about what the society pages will say. My brother. She paused. My brother said it was about time I did something interesting. Ouch! No, actually, that was the most supportive response I got. Alex turned to look at him. They want to meet you. Jim felt his stomach drop. They want to what now? Meet you. Well, they want to vet you, but they're calling it meeting you. Family dinner, probably sometime next week. Very formal, very intimidating, designed to make you understand exactly how out of your league you are. Maybe I am out of my league. Jim, Alex's voice was sharp. Don't you dare start doubting yourself now. You're the first real thing that's happened to me in years. Don't let them make you forget that. Jim looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone ready for battle. This is going to be hard, isn't it? Not just the media stuff, but all of it. Your family, your world, the expectations. Probably, Alex admitted, but hard doesn't mean impossible, and it doesn't mean not worth it. What if I embarrass you? What if I use the wrong fork or say the wrong thing, or... Then you'll be human, Alex interrupted. Which is more than I can say for most of the people they'd prefer I end up with. Jim was quiet for a moment, thinking about Lucy asleep upstairs, about the reporters who'd finally left, about the choice he was facing. Stay safe in his small world, or step into something bigger and scarier and more uncertain than anything he'd ever imagined. Okay, he said finally. Okay? Okay, I'll meet your family. I'll learn how to navigate your world. I'll figure out how to be Lucy's dad and your... whatever I am to you, at the same time. Alex smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. You're my everything, she said simply. That's what you are to me. 2 weeks later, Jim stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting a tie that Lucy had helped him pick out from the 3 options they'd bought at the department store in Burlington. Navy blue with small silver dots, conservative enough to be respectful, interesting enough to suggest personality. You look very handsome, Dad, Lucy said from her perch on his bed, where she was reading while he got ready. She'd begged to come along to the dinner, but Alex had gently explained that this first meeting needed to be just the adults. You think so? Definitely, very grown-up and important. Jim smiled at his reflection, trying to see what Lucy saw instead of what he felt, a small-town mechanic playing dress-up for people who probably spent more on wine than he made in a month. Alex had driven up from Boston that morning. She'd been staying at the family estate for the past week, doing what she called prep work, and what Jim suspected was more like diplomatic negotiations. She'd called him every night, reporting on progress and setbacks with the kind of strategic thinking that reminded him she'd grown up in a world where family dinners were political events. My mother's on board, she'd said the night before. She actually likes the idea of me settling down, even if you're not exactly what she had in mind. My father is reserving judgment. And my brother thinks the whole thing is hilarious and is planning to spend the evening seeing how many uncomfortable questions he can ask. Great, Jim had muttered. Anything else I should know? Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with. Now, driving the hour-and-a-half to the Whitmore estate in his newly detailed truck, Henderson had insisted on a full cleaning and wax job. Claiming it reflected on the shop's reputation, Jim tried to remember that advice. Be yourself. Easier said than done when yourself was about to sit down to dinner with people who could probably buy and sell his entire town without noticing the expense. The Whitmore estate was exactly what Jim had expected, and somehow still shocking in its scope. The main house was a colonial mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine, surrounded by gardens that were clearly maintained by professional landscapers. The circular driveway was longer than most streets in Millbrook. Alex met him at the front door, and Jim felt some of his tension ease just at the sight of her. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than his rent, but her smile was the same one he'd fallen in love with over bicycle repairs and coffee shop conversations. "Ready?" she asked, taking his hand. "No," Jim said honestly, "but let's do this anyway." The foyer was intimidating: marble floors, crystal chandelier, oil paintings that looked both expensive and very old. But before Jim could get too overwhelmed, Alex led him into a sitting room where 3 people were waiting. Catherine Whitmore was elegant in the way that money and good breeding could create: perfectly styled silver hair, understated jewelry, posture that suggested years of deportment training. She rose to greet them with a smile that was polite but assessing. Richard Whitmore was exactly what Jim had expected: tall, distinguished, with the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His handshake was firm, his smile cordial but reserved. And then there was Alex's brother, David, who looked like a younger, more relaxed version of his father. His grin was genuinely friendly, and when he shook Jim's hand, he said, "So you're the one who's got our Alex all turned around. Thank God, we were starting to worry she was going to marry one of those trust fund automatons mother keeps introducing her to." "David," Catherine said sharply, but Jim caught the hint of amusement in her voice. "What?" "It's true. Remember that Pemberton boy? I'm pretty sure he was actually a robot, programmed to discuss yacht maintenance and tax shelters." Despite himself, Jim laughed. David grinned wider. "I like him already," he announced to Alex. "He laughs at my jokes, which shows excellent judgment." Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20, though the 5 of them were clustered at one end of a table that gleamed with crystal and silver. Jim tried not to think about how many place settings he was looking at, or which fork he was supposed to use for what. The conversation started safely: questions about Millbrook, about Jim's work, about how he and Alex had met. Jim found himself relaxing slightly as he talked about the bicycle repair, about Lucy, about life in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. "It sounds peaceful," Catherine said, and Jim caught something wistful in her tone. "It is," Jim agreed, "sometimes almost too peaceful. But it's a good place to raise a child." "Alex tells us you have a daughter," Richard said. 8 years old?" "Yes, sir, Lucy. She's—" Jim paused, thinking about how to explain Lucy to people who'd probably never spent time around children. "She's the best thing in my life. Smart, funny, curious about everything. She keeps me grounded." "I'd like to meet her," Catherine said, "if that would be appropriate." Jim glanced at Alex, who nodded encouragingly. "I think she'd like that. She's been very curious about Alex's family." "What has Alex told her about us?" David asked with interest. "That you're rich, that you care about her, and that you're probably going to ask me a lot of questions to make sure I'm good enough for her," Jim said honestly. The table went quiet for a moment, and Jim wondered if he'd made a mistake with his directness. Then Richard laughed, actually laughed, not the polite chuckle Jim had been expecting. "Well," he said, "at least she's honest." "Dad," Alex said warningly. "No, it's fine," Richard said, turning back to Jim. "And yes, we are going to ask you questions. Not because we don't trust Alex's judgment, but because we care about her happiness. She's been unhappy for a long time. The past few months, since she's been spending time with you, she's been different. Better." Jim felt something tighten in his throat. "She's made my life better too." "How?" Catherine asked, and it wasn't a challenge, it was genuine curiosity. Jim thought about the question seriously. "She sees the world the way I wish I could more often, like there's magic in ordinary things." like broken things are worth fixing instead of throwing away. She makes me want to be better than I am. And Lucy likes her? Lucy loves her. Alex listens to her rock collection presentations and reads her stories and treats her like her opinions matter. She's... Jim paused, realizing he was about to reveal more than he'd planned. She's the mother figure. Lucy's been missing since Sarah died. The silence that followed was different, gentler, more thoughtful. Sarah was your wife? Catherine asked softly. Jim nodded. Cancer. 3 years ago. It's been just Lucy and me since then. I'm sorry, Richard said, and Jim could hear that he meant it. Thank you. It's been hard, but we've managed. And then Alex came along and reminded us that family doesn't always look the way you expect it to. David raised his wine glass. To unexpected family. The rest of dinner passed more easily. They talked about books. Both Catherine and Jim were reticent about travel and about the challenges of maintaining old buildings, whether they were colonial mansions or small-town auto shops. Richard asked thoughtful questions about small business economics, and David regaled them with stories about his work in sustainable energy that made Jim think he might have misjudged Alex's brother as just another rich kid. It wasn't until dessert that Richard asked the question Jim had been dreading. What are your intentions regarding my daughter? Jim set down his coffee cup carefully, aware that all eyes were on him. I love her, he said simply. I want to build a life with her, if she'll have me. I want to marry her, if she'll say yes. And I want to give her the kind of partnership where she can be both Alexandra Whitmore and just Alex, depending on what the day requires. And you understand what marrying into this family would mean? Richard pressed. The scrutiny, the expectations, the responsibility. I'm learning, Jim said honestly. And I'm sure there's a lot I still don't understand. But I understand that Alex is worth whatever complications come with loving her. Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then. All right? Welcome to the family, Catherine said warmly. Though I should warn you, we're much more complicated than we appear. Most families are, Jim replied. Later, as Alex walked him out to his truck, Jim felt lighter than he had in weeks. That went well, Alex said, slipping her hand into his. Did it? I felt like I was taking some kind of test I didn't know the answers to. You were. And you passed. Alex stopped walking and turned to face him. Jim, there's something I need to ask you. Something in her tone made him pay attention. What? This world, my world, it's going to keep being complicated. There will always be reporters sometimes, family obligations, charity events where you'll have to wear a tux and make small talk with people who bore you. There will be business dinners and board meetings and trips to places you never wanted to go. Alex took a deep breath. Are you sure you want to sign up for that? Jim looked back at the house, with its imposing facade and perfect landscaping, then looked at Alex, beautiful, complicated, real Alex who fixed bicycle chains and read bedtime stories and made broken things feel whole again. Will you be there? He asked. Yes. Will Lucy be okay? More than okay. She'll have opportunities I never dreamed of, and she'll still be your daughter first. Then yes, Jim said firmly. I'm sure. Alex smiled, and it was the smile that had started everything tentative but hopeful, like someone learning to trust in good things again. In that case, she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small velvet box, I have something for you. Jim stared at the box, then at Alex, then back at the box. You're proposing to me? Technically, I'm asking you to propose to me. This is my grandmother's engagement ring. She left it to me specifically to give to whoever I chose to spend my life with, regardless of their gender or their bank account balance. Alex opened the box, revealing a simple but stunning diamond solitaire. I know it's unconventional, but then again, so are we. Jim took the box with hands that weren't entirely steady. The ring was beautiful, classic, elegant, timeless. Exactly what he would have chosen if he'd had access to the kind of jewelry stores that sold engagement rings like this. "Alex," he said softly. "You don't have to answer now," she said quickly. "Take some time. Think about it. Talk to Lucy." "Yes," Jim interrupted. "Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. Yes. I want to build a complicated, messy, beautiful life with you. Yes. I want Lucy to have you as a mother, and you to have us as family." Jim closed the box and slipped it into his pocket. "But I'm doing the actual proposing. That's how this works." Alex laughed, and it was pure joy. "Deal." As Jim drove home through the Vermont night, the engagement ring in his pocket and the promise of a future he'd never imagined waiting for him, he thought about broken things and second chances, and the way love could grow in the most unlikely soil. Tomorrow, he'd have to tell Lucy that their quiet life was about to become something bigger and stranger and more wonderful than either of them had planned. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out how to be both Jim the mechanic and Jim the fiancé of Alexandra Whitmore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new questions to answer. But tonight, driving through the darkness toward home, Jim Hendricks allowed himself to believe that sometimes the most broken things could be fixed into something even better than they'd been before. Sometimes the most unlikely stories had the happiest endings. And sometimes all it took was a willingness to help a stranger fix her bicycle on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. 6 months later, on a perfect October morning when the Vermont maples were showing off in shades of gold and crimson, Jim Hendricks married Alexandra Whitmore in the garden behind the Millbrook Community Center. Lucy served as maid of honor, wearing a dress the exact shade of autumn leaves and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. The guest list was small but significant. Alex's family, a handful of Jim's closest friends, Lucy's teacher, and Mrs. Henderson, who'd insisted on catering the reception as her wedding gift. The ceremony was simple, personal, and perfect. When Jim slipped his grandmother's ring onto Alex's finger and she slipped her grandmother's ring onto his, Lucy cheered so loudly that several guests laughed, and the photographer captured a moment of pure, unguarded joy. "Do you take this woman," the minister asked, "to be your wife, in wealth and in simplicity, in spotlight and in shadow, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jim said, and meant it with everything he had. "Do you take this man," the minister continued, "to be your husband, in dreams large and small, in ordinary moments and extraordinary adventures, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Alex replied, her voice steady and sure. "Then, by the power vested in me, and with the blessing of this community, I pronounce you husband and wife." And as they kissed, as Lucy threw flower petals, as cameras flashed and friends cheered, as the October sun painted everything in golden light, Jim knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the simplest acts of kindness. Sometimes, all it took was stopping to help someone fix what was broken. Sometimes, that was how forever began.